Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone here this morning for what will be a very interesting conversation. I'm Toni Verstandig, Executive Director at the Aspen Institute, in charge of the Middle East programs. First of all, just a little housekeeping. I'd like to draw your attention to this blue sheet of paper. It's the daily update. There have been some changes, so please, everyone, they're on campus, pick it up, and you'll be able to get a very current update on today's schedule. So it's my honor and privilege to welcome Tzipi Livni to the Aspen Institute. Mrs. Livni served, as you know, as foreign minister and in charge of the Arab-Israeli negotiating team, and is now currently leader of the opposition, the Kadima party in the Israeli Knesset. So welcome, Mrs. Livni, and Walter, over to you.
Thank you very much, Toni, for helping get all this straight. And thanks to Mickey Bergman, who runs our U.S.-Palestinian partnership and works with Toni on all of our programs. And thank you, Tzipi, for being here again.
Great.
How important is it to get negotiations going before the September possible vote in the United Nations?
Well, I believe that the only way to stop September is by relaunching negotiations. And since I believe that it's the Israeli interests to end the conflict in accordance to the idea of two states for two peoples, and the only way to do so is through negotiations, the sooner the better.
Can you pull this up a little bit?
Yes.
Great.
So the sooner the better, and since we are going to face negotiations this way or the other, I prefer to do it before we have others putting plans on the table, whether it's in Arabic, French, or English American, because I prefer that the outcome would be as part of the results of negotiations that represent the Israeli interest as well. Something that we are not going to face in September in the United Nations, because it's going to relate to basically the Palestinian narrative and interest.
Prime Minister Netanyahu is saying that Israel should be recognized as a Jewish state as the beginning of negotiations. Is he right to insist on that?
No, the raison d'être of the State of Israel is to be homeland of the Jewish people. I believe that the fact that there are those that cannot accept the existence of the State of Israel in the region is not because Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, for now, and Israel is, but because Israel is the only Jewish state in the world. I'm going to answer, but I would like to,
Hey, I'm a journalist.
Okay, I'm a politician. I'm trying not to be that kind of politician. I didn't start by saying this is not the question. But no, this is something which is very important, because the United Nations in 1947, when the United Nations decided on the idea, or embracing the idea of two states for two peoples, basically, he addressed, or the decision was to establish a Jewish state and an Arab state. And this is something I emphasize, that this is something which is very important, or most important for me, because the real question is not we ask the Palestinians to say. Firstly, it's about what we are. And there are some decisions that we need to make also internally. If you want, I can elaborate on this later. Now, during the negotiations with the Palestinians, I was the one that raised this issue of a Jewish state, not just because I want them to say that Israel is a Jewish state. With all due respect, I don't need them to say what is Israel, but because the idea of two states for two peoples means that Israel is homeland of the Jewish people, and the Palestinian state is the answer. And this is something that we need in the negotiations, that the Palestinian state is the answer to the national aspiration of the Palestinians. The meaning is that the establishment of the Palestinian state ends the conflict. This is end of claim, and it gives an answer to the national aspiration of the Palestinians, those who live in the territories, those who live in refugee camps, that Israel is not going to be the options. And also this is the national answer to the Israeli Palestinians that are equal rights citizens, because Israel is democracy and equal rights is also according to our Jewish values, but they cannot demand more national demands from Israel as a Jewish state. And this was part of a concept that I raised in the past, And this is the reason that with Bush administration, I went to Condi Rice, and together we phrased what was called later the Bush letter to Israel, saying that the establishment of the Palestinian state is the answer to the refugees. In the negotiations, we reached an understanding with the Palestinians that the last article of the future agreement would say what I just said, that this is end of claim in accordance to two states for two peoples. Each state gives an answer to the national aspiration of its people, Israel for the Jewish people and the Palestinian state for the Palestinians. Now, the problem now is that things that are very important that need to be discussed during the negotiations became or are becoming the obstacle of why not to negotiate. And basically, this is the difference between attacking or putting on the table the Israeli interest in terms of security, national interest, and so on, and having them in a kind of megaphone diplomacy becoming not only the obstacle before entering the negotiations room, but the more Netanyahu is talking about this, the more question marks we have on the same interest. And this is something that we cannot afford. So I believe that in order to keep Israel as homeland of the Jewish people, we need to make this decision. We need to enter the negotiations room, and in the negotiations room to keep all these interests, including the article that represent the basis of ending the conflict in accordance for two states.
And that solves the refugee problem, which very clearly would just say that the Palestinian refugees go to the Palestinian state.
Well, I'm a lawyer by profession in the end. The meaning is that the creation of the Palestinian state is the answer to the refugees as well. I really don't care whether they are going to come to the Palestinian state or stay in Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. But basically, it's not my problem anymore.
And that's been basically agreed to in the Secretary Condoleezza Rice letter from Bush.
Yes, with the United States, yes.
Right.
It was basically
Then what is the problem that Prime Minister Netanyahu is now raising?
It's not a problem. The problem is not by raising the issues that are important for Israel. The question is whether we are taking all these issues that we need to solve in the negotiations room and transfer all of them to conditions before we enter the negotiations room. And I believe that this is a huge difference, because my understanding is that the negotiations are in Israeli interest, and the only way to build trust with the Palestinians and with the world in a way is in the negotiations room. And like in any other negotiations, I know that when I demand something, their expectation is also to get something in the negotiations room. And since we negotiate all the core issues simultaneously, in the end, we can build a package that gives an answer to the Israeli demands and interests, as well as to the Palestinians' demands and interests. And I believe that there is an agreement in the end of the road that can represent the interests of Israel and the Palestinians, and that are also the interests of the United States of America as well.
So if you were
But in order to do so, we need to enter the negotiations room.
So if you were Prime Minister, you would enter negotiations
Yes.
today with no preconditions?
Of course. I mean, I would continue the negotiations that were stopped, unfortunately, because of the elections in Israel. We negotiated for 9 months in accordance to the Annapolis process. And basically, we built trust. We decided that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. It was discreet, and the world supported it.
And how close did you come?
You know, it's very difficult to say, because it's like two magnets in a way. It's very easy in the beginning, and then in the end, you know, it's very difficult when these are not the opposite. There are some issues that are very sensitive for both peoples. I think that the borders is, nothing is easy, because in the end, I'm talking about the Israeli perspective. We are going to take security risks. We are talking about land that I believe that the Jewish people has the right on the entire historical, biblical, judicial, but yet, for me, the vision is the idea of the Jewish state, so we need to give up part of the land. We left Gaza, we got terror in return, so there are some risks that we need to address in the negotiations room. And, but yet, and of course Jerusalem and the refugees, that for me, basically the only reason for me to accept the idea of two states for two peoples is to end the conflict. And for me, the refugees is not a question of number. It's a question of concept. So this is very important for me, and I know that this is very sensitive for the Palestinians and Jerusalem, of course. Jerusalem, we mean basically what is the most sensitive issue is what we call the Holy Basin. So, but talking about all these issues, I think that the borders are more or easier to solve because it is clear to everybody what are we talking about. And when it comes to defining the borders, it is clear that it's not going to be the exact 67 line. The Palestinians knows that, and in the negotiations room, they accepted the idea of adjustment to this line. This is also the American policy for 3 administrations at least, I think. And they understand that it's not important what each and every one of you thinks about settlements activities, whether it was right, whether it is part of the Jewish people coming back to the homeland of our forefathers, or this is a historical mistake, which is against the international law. In the end, after 40 years, we have settlements, and the good news is that what we call blocks of settlements, where most of the Israelis live outside of the 67 line, takes only a few percentage of the West Bank, so it's solvable. It's going to be the ugliest border in the world, because while defining it, we need to annex the Israeli blocks to keep out the Palestinian villages, and it is one in the other. But we started doing so. We had committees going to see these places.
Well, would you explain to me then, since that's something everybody's agreed on, you say for 3 administrations, that there would be borders based on swaps, based on 67. Why did Prime Minister Netanyahu all of a sudden explode that issue when President Obama mentioned it as a fundamental part in the speech?
Well, the last thing that I want to do today is to explain Prime Minister Netanyahu. Basically, I think that, and it's a pity because since I believe that an agreement is needed, I believe that it's feasible, even though the situation on the ground is very complicated. I think that they are all now playing these tactics, how to negotiate, what's going to be the exact words. And the frustration is that when time passes by, the situation of Israel deteriorates. Because when we launched the negotiations, it was open. It was a clean page. And in the room, we started to discuss all this issue. It was agreed that the implementation is going to be subject to the roadmap and other conditions, and the Palestinian state would not be created if we are going to face terror in the Palestinian territory. And now, more and more is needed in order to pay, in a way, the interest, the ticket in order to enter the negotiations room. So really, it's not for me to explain. And I can say that even in the former administration, we had some discussions and some differences, and not everything was agreed, up to the exact line. We were sometimes on the same page, not on the same exact line. And we had this discussion in private conversations, toughest as they were. It was not public. And I think that this is the right
thing. Do you think it was useful for Netanyahu to be so public in lecturing the President of the United States?
I think that the responsibility of leaders is not to think about their own domestic policy, but to think what is the best thing for the future of the state of Israel.
And you think
I believe that having this kind of public discussions and lectures with the President of the United States is something that doesn't help the interest of Israel in the long run. By the way, not even politics or internal politics, it doesn't help in the long run anyway, even for the Prime Minister. But basically, since the relations with the United States are crucial for the future of Israel, it's of existential nature, it's part of Israel's deterrence when it's come to all these extremists that are watching us, and they know that our strength is not only our really great soldiers. Well, I'm a mother of a soldier as well. But also, it is based on the relations with the United States. So we need to work together in order to recruit in a way, or in order to define what are the mutual interests of Israel and the United States, and work together in order to have these interests being preserved and kept in the negotiations room. And unfortunately, nothing of this is happening right now.
Would you be willing to go into a coalition right now if it was help the negotiations?
I offered Netanyahu more than once to establish a completely different coalition, because for me to be in, I hate politics. So for me to be, no really. So for me to be in politics is just a platform to achieve something. I entered the political life in Israel because of the need to solve the conflict. I believe that I know how to do it, and I think that for now it's feasible, it's achievable. So I offered Netanyahu to form a different coalition in order to do so. Now, unfortunately, we are focusing on September, how to relaunch negotiations, how to have a dialogue. This is not enough. To have a dialogue for a dialogue, okay, maybe this can postpone September, but it's not enough. I need to know that I'm part of a coalition that can support the agreement, the end game. And in order to do so, there's a need to have a balanced coalition, not just me entering a majority and being a minority, or becoming the fig leaf of a government that is not willing to make the real steps. And believe me, entering the negotiations room, this is not the biggest decisions that we are facing. So I offered Netanyahu, he refused, and basically this is the coalition that it is his choice. I said publicly that I'm going to give him safety net to any decision that promotes and continues the negotiations, make the right decisions. So if the problem is that he wants to, but he has some political problems, so I'm willing to solve these problems in addressing this, saying that he's going to have this safety net. But you know what? We want to see unity. And being united is something which is needed, especially when we face difficult times like Israel is facing these days. But it's not enough to be united against those that are against us. We need to decide what we are united for. What do we want also internally in Israel? We can speak about this, about future constitution, about the values of Israel and everything, but also how to end the conflict, how to address these threats, not just by saying that the world is against us, we should sit together and do nothing, but to act, to initiate. Because Zionism was never passive. When they saw all these threats around, they decided what to do. So asking me whether I'm going to join the coalition, my next question is for what? If it is just to be there, no thanks. Even though to be a foreign minister, it can be a dream job, but I'm looking for something else, and this is to make the right decisions.
Why does he not want you?
We have our own differences, the way we see the situation, the way we see Israel internally, and the way we need to meet these threats that are in the region. And I don't like to undermine the nature of the threats, because this is a tough neighborhood. When he sees all these trends and he wants to be passive and to wait until it's over, I believe that we should initiate. Before the elections, he was not even willing to say the two states words when I said publicly that this is an Israeli interest. So apparently, the coalition, when you become a prime minister, you choose the coalition that you think that it serves your goals. So maybe it tells about his view, the coalition that he chose.
Does it help or hurt you that you're a woman? Well, ranging from the peace issue to the ultra-Orthodox.
Well, it depends on the time and the hour that you ask me. While giving birth, it hurts.
Well,
well, for me, personally, it's not a disadvantage. but it is clear to me that in Israel, especially when we are facing these threats, and in Israel people are thinking in terms of security, and usually when they think security, they see a man, usually a general, that takes care for security. It is clear to me that for some of them it's difficult to understand and to accept that a woman can make these kind of decisions. But I proved in the 3 years that I was not only a member of the Israeli cabinet, but also one of of course, the Israeli prime minister and defense minister, we together took the decisions on peace and war. So I hope that it's over when people are thinking of me in Israel. But of course, there are those, especially politicians, that tries that in the last elections, they asked the same question that was asked in English. Who's going to answer the phone 3 o'clock in the morning? Well, I can answer the phone, say, hello, just a minute, I'm giving in the phone. Joking. But, and yes, I can answer the phone. I prove it. And I hope that more and more people understand that making decisions on security, it's not just to look at the situation from security perspective, from the military perspective. You need to have a wider angle in order to do so. And we faced it in the second war in Lebanon, in which at first it was everything about what the military need to do. And then I promoted this idea of having an international decision how to end this discussion. When we are talking about peace, hopefully with the Palestinians, security is part of the discussion, but we need to make decisions which are more broader, more wider, more not only from the military perspective. And in order to do so, you can use the Israeli generals that I highly respect, but the idea is to hear what they have to say about security and the military option, and then to make the decision from a broader angle.
What does it mean to be a Jewish state? Has Israel defined that?
Unfortunately not. We are talking, we are asking the Palestinians to do so. It's, a way of saying you would ask the people in the streets in Israel what Israel is, and they would say a Jewish and democratic state. And then you should ask them, okay, what is a Jewish state? And you are going to hear completely different answers. In Bnei Brak, in Mea Shearim, in other parts of Israel, you would hear that a Jewish state means a halachic state, that the source of authority is the halacha and the Bible. And the rabbis are those that they are the ones that can explain and address and give orders in accordance to the halacha. For others, some of my friends in Tel Aviv, a Jewish state means just a state with a Jewish majority. And for me, a Jewish state means a state. We say Jewish state and it's wrong. We should insist in saying homeland of the Jewish people. Because when you say Jewish state, the appearance, okay, it's a state with a kippah or something. When we say homeland of the Jewish people, it represents the national perspective of Israel. And the meaning is that, by definition, and as I said, this is the raison d'etre of the state, the law of return is the first article of the Constitution, hopefully. It's the symbols, it's the Nefesh Yehudi in the anthem, it's the Magen David on the flag, Jerusalem, the capital, the menorah as symbolizes the state. It's Shabbat as the day off. It's the Jewish holidays. And for me, Yom Kippur in Israel is something, it's an experience that it relates to the public sphere. Now, it tells nothing about the private sphere, and each and everyone can do or to express his own Judaism or his own religion in a matter that he feels appropriate for him or her. And it's not important whether you fast or eat in Yom Kippur, but there is this feeling in Israel in which the sun sets and you have the cars parking and there are those going to the sea. And you have this Jewish music. And all together with the Jewish values, because it's not just about values, we need to define for ourselves and to educate young people what are the Jewish values. Because unfortunately, I hear now in Israel, people are talking about a clash between the Jewish values of Israel and the democratic values. And I think that our responsibility is to have these values living in harmony and not in contradiction. And equal rights to Arab minority is not just because we need to keep, because Israel is a democracy, but because Israel is a Jewish state, and this is according of our Jewish values. And there are, since we didn't define it, we have different parts of the Jewish society. No, we have in first grade in school, you have schools. Well, Israel is embarrassingly small, so you have schools that are few meters. And in one, they teach in Hebrew, the other in Arabic, the third in Yiddish. And it's not the same vision. Mm-hmm. And today in Israel, more than 50% of Israelis at first grade, it's forbidden to teach them about Zionism, about Herzl. And this is something that we need to address now. And,
yeah.
And this is also why I believe that the decision that we need to make, we need to make it now. Because in 10 years from now, we are going to have a majority that their vision is something else.
Majority Palestinian, you mean? If,
No, I'm talking about
yeah.
Israel, whatever its borders are.
Right.
So the problem is that while we are defending ourselves, while we are preaching the world, while we are trying to face this process of delegitimization, the first thing that we need to do is to define to ourselves what we are.
Should you write a constitution?
Yes, we should.
Is that possible now?
It's possible as long as we won't give veto rights to some parts of the politicians in Israel.
I'm sorry, by some parts you mean the ultra-Orthodox
The ultra-Orthodox
rabbis?
and the Arabs. It is amazing because basically constitutions defend minorities. And in Israel, when we try to make this as a constitution, you have the ultra-Orthodox saying that, with all due respect, the source of authority cannot be the constitution, and they don't want the Supreme Court to translate or to be the interpreter of the Constitution. And you have the Arabs that we need to have this discussion with them, because I know that when they understand that the Constitution is not forcing, the Constitution doesn't force them to do something, but it says what Israel is and keeps them as equal rights citizens, I think that this can ease the tension for them as well. But it is not, I was talking about Israel, and I was not talking yet about the Jews at the world Jewry, because when I have Israelis saying, okay, Israel is a Jewish state, it means that we have a Jewish majority and that's enough. And when I ask about new immigrants who came from former Soviet Union that are non-Jews, and I try to ease the conversion system in Israel. And I was told by friends of mine, listen, it's okay, they are going to be Jews. I said, how come? And they said, of course, they are going to school, they speak Hebrew, and they serve in the army. I say, okay. This is something which is very important to serve in the army and to speak Hebrew. But this is not the common denominator between Israel or between us, Jews in Israel, and the world Jewry. And we need to speak and to educate young generation in Israel, as in the Jewish communities abroad, about the shared history, tradition, values, culture, something that connects us. Because when I was speaking about Yom Kippur before, this is something that it's not a matter of, it's not a religious matter, but it's a matter of a tradition. It's not just about how you pray, but about the need to ask for forgiveness, the need to think about the future. And I know that when I'm doing this in Israel, there are Jews in different parts of the world that are singing in different melody, maybe, in different languages, but it connects us, something which is bigger than us. And this is missing now in Israel, and I think that this is also missing in some parts of the Jewish communities.
Do you think that Prime Minister Netanyahu has catered too much to the ultra-Orthodox rabbis in trying to solve the issue you've been talking about?
Yes. The problem in Israel is that we have a completely problematic election system. And we can face these results, the results of this system now. So it's not only the fact that Kadima is the biggest party, but somebody else could form the government. This is just one part of the problem of the system. But also, in order to be the prime minister, you need to form a coalition. And in order to do so, you don't need. But there are weak politicians that are giving to the ultra-Orthodox party not only budgets, but also he gave them the monopoly on the Jewishness of the state to the ultra-Orthodox parties. And this is something that we cannot afford. And since I was born in the Likud, basically, I know that this is a party that represents, like Kadima, the national aspect of Israel. And the name of the Likud is liberal and national and liberal, Leumi Liberali. And it doesn't work with the Orthodox, but this is the only way for Netanyahu to be the prime minister.
But you said he was weak and so had to give that to the ultra-Orthodox?
He didn't have to, but he gave. I didn't. He did.
Could you ever have good relations with the ultra-Orthodox rabbis?
Yes, it's not. Listen, when I'm looking at an ultra-Orthodox rabbi, I'm thinking about my grandfather. It's not like I'm against the ultra-Orthodox. They are part of the Jewish people. The real question is not how do we respect or not respect the ultra-Orthodox or the rabbis. The question is what we are doing with the ultra-Orthodox politics. And are we going to continue in giving them the monopoly on the basics and the values of the state of Israel? And this is something that we cannot afford. And I know that, in politics and in the world, this is a world of images and perceptions, so people would say, okay, she's against the ultra-Orthodox. No, I'm not. Part of my responsibility as future prime minister is to see them as part of the Israeli society, as others. But this is the responsibility of any leader in Israel. So in the past, I thought that the Israeli government, it's good that you have different representatives of different parts of Israeli society in the cabinet. But I changed my mind because after I had been there, you have a cabinet meeting, and unlike, you have here businessmen, and in any company, the board needs to address the welfare or the interest of the company, also according to the law. But when you face an Israeli cabinet meeting, you have different groups, and each tries to get for his sector and his group, and in the end, the party that created the government, the party that is the biggest in the cabinet, doesn't serve the interest of the entire society. And this is wrong. It needs to be changed.
Well, I don't get it then. Kadima is the biggest party.
Oh, yes.
Most people in Israel want the peace agreement. Most people in Israel, I assume, would want a government that was not totally being defined by the ultra-Orthodox when it came to the definition of the state. How come you can't be in power?
Because this system led to a situation in which, in order to be the prime minister, you need to get a coalition. And there were some agreements that were made even before the elections. And when Netanyahu offered me to join this coalition, I said to him, are you willing to have a coalition which is more balanced, you and me working together as long as we can, also as long as we can decide what is the vision, what are the goals and the guidelines of the government? And he said, no, I am bound and I promised I have, how he called this, my natural partners.
Natural partners.
Natural partners.
And the natural partners are Lieberman or the ultra-Orthodox?
Both,
okay. Because
altogether it makes majority. So I said to him that you cannot just, offer me to get married when you are already married with a family. So I have nothing to do there.
And by that metaphor, I take it you could not serve in a government in which Lieberman was the foreign minister.
It's not. It's
Well,
not personal.
I don't mean that personally. You know what I mean.
It's not. No, it's not personal. It depends on the guidelines of the government and the possibility to achieve these goals. So I could have been the foreign minister instead of Lieberman, but it's not enough to be the foreign minister who represent the views and the guidelines of governments that are not mine. Because after 1, 2, 3 days, weeks, months, I'm going to lose the trust, because you cannot convince the world that this government is going to do something that is not going to do. So it's a matter of decision, and in Israel, in the end, it's the prime minister who makes the decision. If he wants to, he can recruit his government. We could see it with Sharon in the past. We could see it with others. When the prime minister decides to do something, he can find a majority to do so. The political majority and the majority in the public opinion. I know that especially when it comes to the peace process with the Palestinians.
If Sharon were still prime minister, would there be peace with the Palestinians?
I don't know. No, I mean, I don't know. Hopefully, but I don't know.
When would you like to see elections? And if there are elections, would you win them?
Well, it's Saturday tomorrow, next week. The sooner the better. The sooner the better, the sooner the better because time is of the essence. Because there is no status quo. And when the Israeli government doesn't make the decisions that we should, there are those that makes the decisions for us. There is no status quo. When there is a status quo with the Palestinians, there is no status quo with the world, with the international community, with the United States of America. There is this ongoing process of delegitimization of the state of Israel, especially as a Jewish state. There are more and more question marks what Israel is. And when we have this without our own internal decisions and without making steps toward peace with the Palestinians, I hope that we would not reach a point of no return. It's not too late now, I know that. And I know that when the moment comes, most of the Israelis supports the views that I just shared with you. So I think that we can make this change. I know that we can make this change, but in order to do so, there's a need for elections. The sooner the better.
What did you mean by point of no return?
In order internally to make the decisions, the Constitution, to have these decisions to define the Jewishness of the State of Israel in accordance to the views that represent the national interest, we need also a majority within Israel. And we have these demographic changes in which you have more and more ultra-Orthodox, less and less, I don't want to say seculars, but others. The Israeli society is changing amongst the Israeli Arabs. I'm not talking about the Palestinians, but the Israeli Palestinians, as long as the conflict continues, they feel alienated from the state of Israel. They don't understand what do we mean when we say Jewish state, because we didn't also work this with them. So we need also majority internally, even just to make these decisions. And when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the need to solve it, it's not just an Israeli decision. It relates also to the situation in the region. Until a few months ago, we had Mubarak as the president of Egypt, supported deeply the Palestinians. Any Palestinian leader who wants to make an agreement with Israel needs the support of the Arab world. We don't know what's going to be the changes in the Arab world, whether we are going to face, new democracy and we can live happily ever after and make peace with peoples, not just leaders. This is one option, but we can face also another option in which we can see more and more extremism or weak leaderships that it's difficult for them to support the decisions. I was talking about compromises coming from the Israeli side, but the Palestinians need to compromise as well.
Well, when you talk about what's happening in the Arab...
But timing is almost everything in life. And it is true also to politics and to international politics.
But you're talking about
And
the
now
Arab Spring and which way
Yes.
it's going to go. You don't think Israel should wait and see which way the Arab Spring, whether it's going to lead to Islamist governments or democratic governments, before it makes a decision on what to do?
No, I think that this is the most, the basic intuition is to wait. Something is happening, let's wait and see until it's over and then make the decision. The appearance is that this is the clever thing to do. But I think that this is going to be an historical mistake, because I don't think that we can shape the future outcome of elections in the Arab world. But since, for me, solving the conflict with the Palestinians is an Israeli interest anyway, it is not connected to the extremists in the region. And it is clear to me that extremism doesn't emerge from the Israel, or the reason for extremism is not the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but it is clear that they abuse the conflict. Iran abuses the conflict, even though if we solve the conflict tomorrow morning, Iran is not going to change its ideology, and not the Muslim Brotherhood or Hezbollah or Hamas. But they are going to abuse this conflict in order to get more support from radical elements. So the sooner we can do it, the better it is. I don't want the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to be part of the agenda in future elections in Egypt. Now, I know that these young people that took the streets, they were not fighting against Israel, they were fighting for their own rights. But now Israel is becoming part of the agenda. You have now 25,000 people demonstrating against, today, right now, Friday, in front of the Israeli embassy in Cairo. So, waiting for what? I mean, in the end, the choice for Israel is one of two options. And maybe the two options are bad options, but in the Middle East, we need to choose sometimes between bad options. One is accepting, adapting, promoting, and implementing the idea of two nation states in order to keep and preserve the values of Israel as homeland of the Jewish people and a democracy. The other is to have not to make these decisions. And in the end, it's going to lead to one state between Jordan River and Mediterranean Sea. It's not going to be a Jewish state, it's going to be an Arab state. These are realities. So, and waiting doesn't help to make the decisions which are needed in order to stop the other trend. So it's about our interest. And it is not connected. It can be more problematic when we have more extremism. The risks are higher when we have more extremism. Not trying to undermine the threats. But we need to be... I'm convinced that the price of having an agreement is cheaper than the price of not having an agreement. And maybe this is the difference, since you asked me about Netanyahu and myself, maybe this is the basic difference between Netanyahu and myself.
That seems a good note upon which to open it up to the audience. Yes, is that Stuart, I think? We've got bright lights in my eyes, so if you're not Stuart, pretend to be. Ambassador Bernstein.
To quote a friend of mine, Walter Isaacson, it is obvious that within 1,000 yards, both sides know what the end deal is going to be. And I'm confused. So are you saying it's the minority parties of Israel that are blocking a deal to being made? What's holding us up if at the end of the day we know what the deal's going to look like?
I'm not going to be the one who's going to undermine the responsibility of a prime minister to make the decisions. It's not about minorities in Israel, it's the decisions that the prime minister need to make. Now, it is clear that it took some time to the current Israeli prime minister even to say the words. So, unfortunately, when...
Two states.
Two states for two peoples, yeah. So, basically, it's a matter of policy. When you say everybody knows, I know that everybody knows that there is one agreement. And everybody knows that in the end, this is the price of the agreement, both sides. The question is whether everybody is willing to pay the price. And this is the big question today.
Way back there to keep our microphone runners in shape.
You were fairly critical yesterday of how Bibi handled Obama's comments about the 67 borders, and I got the impression that if you were confronted with a situation where the American president took a position that you were vehemently opposed to, that you would have handled it differently. And my question is, how would have you handled that?
The problem is that Obama didn't say that Israel needs to go back to 67 lines. Netanyahu said that Israel would never go to 67 lines. So it was a kind of a discussion between two leaders that are saying basically maybe the same, but a huge discussion. So Obama said something that represents the American policy in the last 3 administrations. It doesn't mean that Israel needs to accept this, each and every word of any American president in any speech, but there is a right way and a better way to discuss differences, and this is in closed rooms, quietly. And I know, since I was there, that most of the Israeli interests are also American interests. So it's easier to have the United States supporting the Israeli interest. And this is something which is missing today. I can take all the interests that we need to keep in the negotiations room and to explain why this is also an American interest. Israel's security, it's not a favor to Israel because the United States doesn't want another terror state or extreme Islamic state or a failed state like we see in Lebanon these days in the region. Talking about the future line or the future border, it is clear to everybody that it's going to be impossible, even if there are those that from ideological point of view want this exact 67 line, it's not going to happen because we have hundreds of thousands of Israelis living in places that, from the positive point of view, takes only a few percentage of the West Bank, and the Palestinians knows that there are going to be some adjustment. Talking about the ending the conflict, this is an Israeli interest, this is also an American interest. Nobody wants to have just a piece of paper which is going to be just, a part of an ongoing conflict that being transferred into a conflict between two states. So ending the conflict, the idea that that each state gives an answer to the national aspiration of its people, this is the only way to end the conflict. So this is also an American interest. And in all of these issues, we worked with the former administration, and I know that all these issues are bipartisan in the United States as well. So the question is how to work with the United States in order to relaunch negotiations, and not how to have these public discussions or public fights when it's not needed.
Quick follow-up. If elected prime minister, how would you deal with the situation in the Silwan Valley?
If I had been the prime minister, and I will, no, I would have relaunched the negotiations after the elections. I negotiated, the negotiations didn't fail, we didn't reach a dead end. It was just stopped. It was welcomed by the entire international community. The United States was involved, but not in the room. The Palestinians trusted us, we trusted the Palestinians. This is the word that is missing today, and this is trust. So asking me what I would have done if I had been in the United States the exact day, hearing the American president saying this and that, this is not the situation. I would have been in a completely different situation now.
Joe Gildenhorn.
With Hamas joining Fatah now, does this inhibit negotiations, or do you still believe negotiations are in order in light of what Hamas believes in, the destruction of Israel?
Okay, thank you. Hamas is an example to a problem on the ground that can be solved, but yet now this becomes also another obstacle. Why not to negotiate? I believe that Hamas is a problem. Hamas is not only a terrorist, designated terrorist organization, but it's also an ideological group that is not willing to end the conflict with Israel. They don't fight for the establishment of a Palestinian state. They fight in order to deprive us from our rights. The basic rights to live, by the way. It's not about the Jewishness of the state, it's about the state of Israel, without any connection to the future borders of the state of Israel. They are willing to accept a Palestinian state 67 border as long as they don't need to sign that this is the end of conflict. So Hamas is a problem, Hamas is there, and Hamas won the elections in the last Palestinian elections, and now we have this agreement between Fatah and Hamas. So those who doesn't want to end the negotiations from and trying to find the reasons and excuses not to do so, Hamas is a very good reason or excuse. We left Gaza Strip, we got Hamas in return, they target Israeli cities, they are terrorists, they are looking for children and civilians to kill. Everything is true, and this is the reason that we worked in order to delegitimize Hamas. And part of the way to delegitimize Hamas and to act against them in Gaza, and we attacked Hamas in Gaza in the operation in Gaza, we could do it because we have the world supporting the idea of delegitimizing Hamas altogether with Israel, because the world, the international community understood what I just said, that there is no hope for peace with Hamas. And that it is a zero-sum game, that we have this clash of civilizations between pragmatics and extremists among the Palestinian society. And when Hamas is stronger, Fatah is weaker. So it's not just Israel against the Palestinians and vice versa. It's Israel plus the legitimate Palestinian government against Hamas and the other extremists in the region. So the basic idea is to delegitimize Hamas. And this is the reason that I believe that there is no hope for peace with them and there is no need, or we don't, it's not, while negotiating with Hamas, it's a damage because it damages the hopes for peace. And it's a message to the extremists that terror works. And this is something that we cannot afford. So I'm not going to negotiate with Hamas, and I'm not going to give the keys of the future Palestinian state to Hamas. Now, we have an agreement between Fatah and Hamas. The agreement was not implemented into a Palestinian government yet. I don't know whether a Palestinian government would be created in accordance to this agreement or not. What we should do now is to say to Mahmoud Abbas, to Abu Mazen, you are talking about your willingness to relaunch negotiations, you want peace. It is clear that you accept the requirements of the international community, to accept the right of Israel to exist, to renounce violence and terrorism, and to accept adherence to former agreements. This is part of your ideology. Now this should be part of the future guidelines, or the guidelines of the future Palestinian government. So for me, the test case is what's going to be the guidelines of the future government. It's not about Hamas, it's about the government. If we have a Palestinian government that accepts the requirements of the international community, we can work with them. And I think that this is feasible. Asking Hamas to accept these requirements is something that I believe would never happen. But in choosing between options, and since I prefer to reach an agreement with those that are willing not only to accept the requirements of the international community for now, but to end the conflict with Israel. You can ask me the next question, but what's the use of making an agreement with those that are willing to make an agreement with you when you have Hamas? So the idea is to have an agreement with them, and in terms of business, it's like signing an agreement with somebody who has signature right on a bank account which is empty. And Abu Mazen, yes, he cannot control Gaza. I don't know whether he can visit Gaza these days. But I need this signature because Israel needs borders that are legitimate. Israel needs an agreement that defines the security interest of Israel as part of an agreement, and having the international community supporting this. And then we agreed we should re-agree with the Palestinians that the implementation on the ground is going to be just when the Palestinians accept the agreement, and the establishment of the Palestinian state would be postponed until the moment in which Hamas decides what are they doing with an agreement that was signed. Now, ideological groups, usually, they have a problem to sign something or to make a statement, but they can live with realities on the ground. Hamas is living with an existing Israel. They are not willing to say for more than 4 years now that Israel has the right to exist. It's about rights because it's an ideological, extreme religious ideology group. The day after an agreement, the Palestinians need to choose whether to support Hamas and to see the Palestinian state something on the paper that would never be established, or to vote for those that can create their own states. But the ball is going to be on the Palestinian side, and Israel, and I hope that this can stop the process of delegitimization of the State of Israel, and we can enter an interim period of time in which we have borders, we can start in dismantling settlements, but keeping our forces, our army, inside the territories. It's part of a bigger plan. That Hamas is a problem, it's an obstacle, but we have a solution how to bypass this obstacle for now, not trying to, not by reducing or trying to accept them. I don't accept them. I would never accept them as such. But we can work with the others, and this is our responsibility as well.
And so what you're saying is President Abbas, Abu Mazen, could be a partner for peace. You could make a peace, and then the Palestinian people, including Hamas, would have to choose, do you want to be part of that peace, or do you want to not have a state?
And we agreed in the first place that the establishment of the Palestinian state would be subject to these parameters.
Right, and that you'd have to do that pretty quickly before Hamas and
before
Fatah
Hamas takes over the entire territory.
So it's another
reason, yes.
to act quickly.
Yes.
Sorry, well, there was a gentleman there with a microphone.
John Negroponte here.
Oh, John Negroponte. I should have.
Good to see you again, Madame Livni. I have a question that's not directly related to the peace process you've been discussing, but it's certainly relevant. Could you tell us a bit about how you see the internal situation in Syria unfolding, what some of the possible outcomes might be, and what you think the implications are for Israel?
Good question.
It's a very good question, and since I said at the beginning that I'm not that kind of a politician, I'm going to give another answer that shows this, because I don't think that there is somebody who can give quite an intelligent answer to this question, what's going to be next in Syria the day after Assad. It is clear to everybody, I think, especially today when we have all these people in the streets, that when it comes to Assad and to this regime, that it's not a matter of if, but of when we are going to see the changes in Syria. It's too early to know who's coming next, what is coming next, what's going to be the nature of the next regime. It's too early to see what's going to be the role of Iran in all this, because it changes the ties that we used to. I don't know whether it changes, but it can affect this axis of Hezbollah, Syria, Iran. So now these are the middle of changes. And when we had Assad, we knew what we had, and it's too early to know what's going to come next. But of course, it can lead to anxiety in the region, but it's not a policy. And it is clear that when we had all these Syrians not attacking Israel, but coming to the Israeli fences in order to demonstrate in these symbolic days of the creation of the State of Israel. The Iranians were involved in Syria by provoking them to do so. So weakness of who's coming next can influence the possibility of Iran to be more involved in Syria, and this is something that is problematic for the region, I believe.
First of all, I agree with Ted Turner. I think the world would be a better place if we turned over our governments to women leaders. So thank you very much for your comments.
You might identify yourself if you don't
I'm
mind.
sorry, Gideon Stein with the Moriah Fund. You referenced the more religious and conservative shift within Israeli society. As a funder of civil society and human rights organizations in Israel, like New Israel Fund and Association for Civil Rights in Israel, what advice do you have for us as we become more frustrated with the ad hominem attacks with groups like...
I cannot hear.
I'm sorry. What advice do you have for us as a funder of civil society and human rights in Israel as we become the subject of ad hominem attacks by groups like Titsu and Lieberman and others?
As long as this is part of a discussion between different groups in Israel, it's part of democracy. So this is the discussion that can be part of Israel society. These are discussion on the future of the State of Israel, the nature of the State of Israel, as long as part of the Israeli values are freedom of speech. And this is something that we need to keep. And there are some trends in the Israeli parliament that new attempts to affect freedom of speech in Israel, and Kadima is not going to be part of it. And we are going to fight for, we can argue or we can have differences of different opinions about different issues, but Israel is democracy and continue to be so. And you know, I believe that Israel is strong enough also to hear some criticism coming from the inside, outside, and we shouldn't be afraid of criticism, especially when it comes inside the family. So I know that it comes from love.
And does that raise the question of a lot of the American Jewish community? Now, I think Ron Lauder and others have begun to criticize the current policies of Israel, which are the closest friends of Israel in America.
What was the question?
Well, you're looking at the American Jewish community starting to have more qualms and speak up. What would you say to American Jews?
I believe that we need to open a new dialogue between Israel and the world Jewry. A new dialogue in order to define what Israel is, because when we define ourselves as homeland of the Jewish people, it refers to the entire world Jewry. It's not just about Jews living in Israel. So we need to have this dialogue together, because otherwise we are going to see different tribes living in Israel and another tribe living outside of Israel. I think that Israel is strong enough to have this dialogue that we can live also with some criticism, as long as, and I expect the world Jewry, when they can criticize any Israeli government policy. But it is not less important for them to understand that sometimes this criticism, when it comes to the basics of the State of Israel, can be abused by those who are trying to delegitimize the State of Israel. So when I'm talking about responsibility, this is also part of the responsibility that I expect from Jewish leaders. They don't need to support any Israeli government policy, but yet when it refers to the basics, to the values of Israel, to Zionism, we expect to have support on this and differentiate, or having an understanding that there can be a distinction between Israel as such, our value, what Israel is, what it means to everybody, and any Israeli government policy. And I believe that in doing so, we can have more and more young people in the Jewish communities feeling more connected to the State of Israel, because I know that these young people are defending Israel in universities. They are advocating for the State of Israel because they feel that they are part of it. But I know that some of them are feeling now alienated, and it's part of our responsibility when I was talking about education of new generation in Israel about these values and the basics, and they need to know that they are part of something which is greater, I think that this is also the responsibility to do it together in the Jewish communities, to have a better understanding what Israel is. And when we know, we are talking all together about this process of delegitimization of the State of Israel. And the first rule in branding is that you need to decide at first for yourself what is the added value of your company. So when we understand for ourselves at first what Israel is, believe me, it's going to be easier to defend and to advocate for Israel, because when you are speaking, you represent the values that you are fighting for. And this is something that we need to do together.
We would love to have you back
Okay.
as Prime Minister, perhaps.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.